Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Studio Chojin Raw. And once again, I am joined with Fan Without a Face. How are you doing, Face?
I'm doing pretty good, Reverend. I'm glad to be back on the show again and delight and entertain all our viewers with some more anime news.
Indeed, I'm glad to have you here again. So, it's been a while since the last time we talked. I guess it's been like a month. So, what did you think about Kong vs. Godzilla?
Honestly, I thought the fights were pretty good, and, well, obviously the human characters were definitely the weakest aspect. I definitely felt a bit more for like the team that was supporting Kong than Godzilla, but I really felt disappointed because compared to like Godzilla King of the Monsters, I at least cared and remembered some of those characters. But here, I just didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't care about Millie Bobby Brown, I didn't care about the conspiracy dude, and I didn't care about the little deaf girl or her mom or any of them. I really didn't find them interesting. But the thing that bugged me the most about the movie was the fact that it felt so one-sided. I know a lot of people love to say, oh, well, Kong can't beat Godzilla. He's just a big gorilla while Godzilla's a fire-breathing dragon monster. And I'm just like, I get that, but could you at the very least make it not so frickin' one-sided? At least give him a win where he doesn't need to be backed up by the little humans all the damn time. The thing I would have liked, what I would have preferred, is if instead of just finding the axe that he uses to fight Godzilla, I would have preferred it if, like during, say, his second fight, he actually manages to rip one of Godzilla's spines off of his back and then uses that to make the axe himself. That way, it shows that Kong can compete with Godzilla, gives him an injury that's actually noticeable and does something, and makes the axe feel more natural, like Kong using his brain makes the weapon, showing his intelligence to fight back better against Godzilla.
No, that's what I thought was going to happen. I thought Kong was going to make that axe himself. I didn't think he was going to find it. I agree with you. The human characters are very underdeveloped, and you were one of those people last time we talked, like you were rooting for Kong, right?
I always root for Kong. I think it's just because I have a soft spot for gorillas. I've always thought they were cool, so I always rooted for Kong. But even back when I was a kid, I rooted for Kong in the original movie, and I was rooting for him here too. I feel like what they should have done was they should have given one more movie to develop Kong further, develop his fighting skills a little bit more before having him go head-to-head against Godzilla, just to make it feel a little less rushed, I
guess the one thing you could say with Kong vs. Godzilla is that they tried to paint Kong as the underdog, and Godzilla was almost like the Ivan Drago of this movie, and Kong was more, they humanized him more, they made him a lot more vulnerable, so they try to make him a little bit more sympathetic. And even though he loses to Godzilla, he does save the day by beating Mechagodzilla.
I don't have a problem with him losing necessarily, it's him losing so badly. It's just like, when you root for someone, you at least hope they pose a legitimate challenge. When Godzilla fought King Ghidorah in King of the Monsters, he almost killed him. Yeah, you can kind of attribute that to the oxygen destroyer, but in each fight, you legitimately felt like Godzilla could lose, like he could die, and he was seriously injured, and he actually had to be saved more than once by either the humans or Mothra or some other thing. But here, Godzilla never needed any help against Kong. It never felt like Kong posed a legitimate challenge, even when he had the axe.
Kong never really had a formidable adversary like Godzilla before. I mean, in Skull Island, he's fighting those skull crawler things, whatever they call them. Like, if they would have given him like an actual monster to fight, like, if he fought Baragon or something, like that would have been cool, and then they could lead to a fight with Godzilla, and it would make him more formidable.
Honestly, an idea I had was that they'd have a second Kong movie where they use one of the other kaiju that's mentioned in King of the Monsters, which, for whatever reason, attacks Skull Island. Kong manages to beat this titan, while also uncovering, say, a tunnel to the Hollow Earth found on Skull Island, and maybe they explain that part of the reason that Godzilla never knew Kong was around was maybe because the storm surrounding Skull Island kept Godzilla from being able to sense him, but maybe during the fight Kong has with this other titan, it disrupts the storm and allows Godzilla to finally sense Kong's presence, and he sees him as a threat, which is what leads to them fighting in the next movie.
So overall, you were disappointed with Kong vs. Godzilla?
I didn't hate it, but when I see monsters fighting, I want to at least feel somewhat invested in the story. Not grossly invested, it doesn't have to be like Lord of the Rings, but in King of the Monsters, I at least cared about the human characters and stuff they were doing, whereas in this one, it basically feels like I could just watch all the fights on YouTube and skip everything else, which I really shouldn't be doing in a movie of Godzilla vs. Kong.
So what is going on in the world of anime news?
Well, a lot of things are going on. Most notably, a lot of new seasons for various anime are being released. introduced, some that we expected, but some we were actually not anticipating or we never thought we'd get. Most notably, one of the bigger announcements was the reveal that they are finally making a second season of the reverse isekai anime, The Devil is a Part-Timer.
Yeah, that was surprising. I mean, it was like, what, 2013 when that first season came out?
April 4th, 2013. That was a long time ago, and many figured it was going to be like Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt, where the potential for a sequel was there, but we were never going to get anything for one reason or another.
Do we know how well the series did, like on Blu-ray and the ratings?
As far as like sales, I don't think it was doing that great, but I have, at least from a few YouTube videos I saw about it and some articles I read, it was definitely fairly popular with people and had a fair amount of staying power. Plus it was on Netflix, or still is on Netflix, the Japanese version at least, and people still have positive things to say about it.
It's a show I really like. I really like that idea, that whole reverse isekai thing of like, rather than have normal characters go to a fantasy world, we're going to have the fantasy characters go to a human world and then have to assimilate in human society. And that to me is really where the strength of the show is, because I actually find kind of like the fight sequences they have in the show, the two they have, the one where he's fighting Lucifer and then the one where he's fighting the angel. I mean, they're fun, but they're kind of not really as interesting as just the slice of life stuff where it's just Satan trying to figure out how to like survive on his part-time job and like managing his love life with the chick, the girl who works there, Chi, and then the other
Emmy.
girl, yeah.
I do enjoy the relationship between the characters, especially Mao and Musa. Emmy, that's the main heroine character's name. They just work off each other so well. I mean, Emmy is so emotional and prone to extreme reactions to stuff, while Mao, who we have to remember, he's like 300 years old, he just doesn't give a damn half the time, and it's just so fun to see them take pot shots at each other over and over again. Emmy taking shots at him for being broke and everything, whereas he takes shots at her for being clumsy or dumb or naive and everything. It is pretty funny.
I really like that, and I love the fact that when they start alluding to the whole fantasy stuff, I like it when they start incorporating it into the real world. So I like the whole idea that like the battle between heaven and hell almost gets boiled down to this war between McRonald's and SFC. You know, like that's awesome.
Yeah, one thing that actually gets explored later in the series is how it is essentially not just a reverse isekai, but it's also like a deconstruction of the generic fantasy genre. Like, you know how in Goblin Slayer, for the most part, it's pretty much broken down to Goblin Slayer is a hero, kind of. Goblins are evil, he kills goblins. That's it. The Devil is a Part-Timer is a different beast in that respect. Spoilers for, like, possibly the second season, but also the light novels. Emmy apparently is like a traditional heroine. She's noble, just, and hates demons. She just assumes they're evil, and that's the end of it. But Mao eventually reveals that, for one thing, he's not some chosen demon lord that was born to be evil. He was originally just a goblin, like a low-level demon, weak as hell. And he also reveals that Satan is apparently a very common name in the demon world, like the Bob of demon names. So even that's not special or anything. But he explains that the demons for years spent all their time fighting and murdering each other like a survival of the fittest kind of thing. The reason that he rose to power and tried to conquer Ente Isla was essentially to create a kingdom where the demons didn't have to constantly fight each other anymore and could build a thriving society. Kind of like what they do in That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime with the Land of Tempest. But of course, Emmy, being a hero, never really questioned that because she just assumed demons were evil. But that, and also the religious order in Ente Isla, which kind of makes up the Heaven faction, kind of, for humans, they basically just told her, demons are evil, you're the chosen one, here's your magic sword, go kill demons, and don't question it. But as the story progresses, she starts to really question all the things she did, whether demons are truly evil, whether what she was doing was genuinely good, whether she's even good. It really takes what was originally a very black and white story and basically soaks it in gray. And it's very fascinating to read and watch.
Yeah, I agree with you, because you definitely get the sense, I mean, I haven't read the light novels or the manga, but watching the first season of the anime, I definitely get the sense that there is this moral ambiguity where we don't really know who is good and who is evil, and I really like that about the show. And even the character like Chi, where, I mean, she's the only person who's really neutral in here because she's not from Ente Isla, and she sees the good in Satan. I think that's a really interesting perspective that the show is kind of bringing to these kind of demon tropes that we see a lot.
But of course, the thing I always found the most enjoyable is the relationship between Emmy and Mao. It just works so well between the two of them. They hate each other so much, and yet you can't help but think in the back of your mind, yep, they're gonna bang, or they're gonna kiss, or please for the love of God, kiss already, you two. 2. The writing is literally on the walls. Please do it already.
I'm gonna sound like a real boomer here, but it's like Sam and Diane in Cheers.
I've heard of Cheers. I never watched it.
Cheers was a sitcom in the 80s with Ted Danson and Shelley Long, and they worked in a bar. And Ted Danson was the bartender. He was this kind of gruff everyman, and then Shelley Long was like the ritzy, stuck-up girl. And they had this like contentious relationship where they hated each other, but their hate was filled with sexual tension. And that's what you're getting with Emmy and Satan in this show, where you have these two characters who, they're bitter enemies and they hate each other, but that comes through. That sexual tension between these two characters is like you could cut it with a knife. It's so obvious.
It gets a lot better in this coming season because they introduce a new party to the game who really turns up the sexual tension and relationship drama between these two, and it is glorious.
I really like what it's doing so far. I mean, in some ways it actually reminds me of Stephen King's Dark Tower, where I think it's the second Dark Tower book. I don't think this is a spoiler, but spoilers if you don't want the Dark Tower spoiled for you. At the end of the second book of the Dark Tower, I believe it's the second book, The Drawing of the Three, where the Dark Tower is this fantasy universe, but the climax of the second book takes place in a drugstore in New York, and it's the character trying to buy antibiotics. That's the big climax of this epic fantasy story. And that's what I feel like Devil is a Part-Timer is doing, where it's taking these big fantasy ideas and it's distilling them down to like everyday life. And I really love that about this series. And these characters are all great. They're all really likable.
All of them are really likable in their own way. I love how Arushihara, or Lucifer, he is just such a lazy bum. It is just like hilarious how everyone just takes every attempt to take a shot at him, calling him lazy, making fun of how little food he gets, or calling him a moocher or a spend-heavy punk. And this is the guy who, a few episodes ago, was flying all around in the sky, launching laser beams at everybody, and at one point was a general who took over like a quarter of a country, and you're like, wow, what the heck happened to him?
I love that too, because I have known people like that in my life. Like people who they were gainfully employed, they were working, and then whatever reason, they got laid off and then just never got another job, and then just sat around for the rest of the, sat around for like the longest time ever. And it's like, that's what he is. He's almost like a commentary on that slacker thing of like, okay, this guy lost his job and now he's just kind of sitting around hanging out, not really doing anything, and he doesn't really want to get another job. It's like, I thought that was really great. When you start looking at it like that, there's actually a lot of like social commentary in the show. And even what you were saying, where, the whole system of demons and how they're not actually bad, and it's the, religious sect that's kind of making things this way. It's deceptively a really, really smart show that's hidden underneath all this kind of like slice of life romance comedy stuff.
I definitely think that, at least to me, the weakest link has to be Chiho to an extent. Don't get me wrong, I like her character. She's cute, she's bubbly, and she does have her moments to shine, but I do kind of feel sometimes like she gets a little too much attention, and her whole crush on Mao, it's funny and everything, but I kind of wish it had just been one of those things that kind of like petered out after a while. But apparently a lot of people really like her character, and this is no joke, I've actually read this in a few articles, but in the first season of the anime, evidently the guy who was directing the anime, he liked her character so much he actually gave her more stuff to do in the anime compared to the manga. He made her more prominent than she was there.
I like where she is in the story. I like that she's kind of like the comic relief, and she's there to like be jealous, and she's almost like that third wheel in the relationship between Mao and Emmy. It's fun the way they use her. I could definitely see if they gave her more screen time, like if they dedicated an entire episode to her, then it might get a little old. But I think the way they use her is pretty well done.
I feel like The Devil is a Part-Timer is a very enjoyable series, not just because of the story and the characters, but also because it's very funny, with the expressions almost always getting a laugh out of me, especially when you consider the fact that one of them is an all-powerful demon lord who not just a few weeks ago was ruling over an entire country with an iron fist, and the other one is basically a fantasy hero who's tripping down staircases because of the heels she's wearing while descending them. It is just so funny to consider that, but also it's just a nice, comforting slice of life kind of story, just watching the day-to-day lives of these people living in a relatively nice, peaceful kind of world.
It's a lot of fun. I like the show, and I'm definitely looking forward to the second season. So what else is going on in the world of anime?
Well, obviously one of the biggest topics of conversation would be the fact that one of the newest of the big three of this generation, My Hero Academia, finally got its 5th season, which premiered back in March 2017 and is on episode 5 5, I think, at this point. And as you can imagine, that's getting a lot of buzz from people, considering it's basically one of the biggest view catchers of all anime right now.
I'm enjoying it so far, even though it feels like, we're still in the early stages of the season where we're just having this exhibition fight between Class A and Class B. So, it doesn't really feel like we're going to get a lot of story details, but the action sequences we've gotten and the action sequences we will get as a result of this stage in the story, I think will be really good. But I'm really looking forward to seeing, the villains get developed more.
Oh yeah, I definitely consider the Class 1A versus Class 1B arc to be one of the weaker ones. It's cool that we get to see all the different quirks, costumes, and abilities of Class 1B, and also get to see Shinso strut his stuff after he was shown as sort of like the dark horse of the sports festival arc. But I feel like the fact that for the most part this arc really doesn't have any stakes to it and is more just, a bit of character showcase, it does kind of hurt it a little bit. But as someone who's up to date on the manga, I know that there are some big heavy bombshells that are going to be dropped in this particular arc. Though if you're looking for villain development and real world building and development in the story, then the next arc is going to give you that in spades.
There might be an instinct with some people to say that these tournament arcs are kind of pointless, but I do think they serve a point because they are developing the characters and they're introducing newer characters who are going to become important later on in the story. And this is kind of where, we're starting to see the forming of these relationships that are going to become very important when the characters are in life or death situations. I think these tournament arcs, while sometimes they could feel a little redundant, I think they're very important to the overall story.
I'm pretty sure the only person I've ever heard complain about tournament arcs in anime is Bennett the Sage. I've never really hated tournament arcs for the most part, except maybe in One Punch Man, where it really did feel redundant since almost all the characters in the tournament were basically just no-name characters who don't do anything. But as someone who's a big fan of the Dark Tournament arc from Yu Yu Hakusho, I really do enjoy tournament arcs if they're done correctly, which they, for the most part, usually are, except maybe in Pokemon, but I digress. Though I really wouldn't consider this a tournament so much, considering there's no brackets. It's more like it's more like...
It's like an exhibition. It's like an exhibition match.
Yeah, like I said, it's more of a character showcase. Although I have to admit, unlike 1A, where most of the characters, save for Koda, the tail guy, and Toru, the invisible girl, most of the characters from Class 1B don't really get a lot of focus in the later chapters, save for Kendo and Monoma and Tetsu.
Yeah, that was one thing I was thinking when I was watching the last episode, where I was thinking that, I'm wondering if we're introducing too many characters. You're wondering if it's getting a little, if the characterizations are going to get spread thin because we've introduced so many characters that we're not going to be able to, cover them all.
Just with Class 1A in general, with a cast of 20 plus characters just from them alone, you obviously expect there to be a few duds. Ojiro's personality is, well, he's a nice guy and he has a tail and he likes karate and that's it. And then there's Koda, he likes animals and he's shy and that's it. Then you've got Toru, she's invisible, kind of an exhibitionist since she runs around naked save for boots and gloves, which I still question the practicality of that. And she's bubbly and that's it. It's wow. Okay, I know you probably had some trouble coming up with personalities for all these guys, but really, that's the best you got?
I actually think the characterizations are one of the strongest parts of My Hero Academia. I don't think it's the problem is with the personalities. I think the problem is they don't have a lot of room to be showcased. I think that's the issue that happens, because I feel like that happens a lot with the female characters, which I know shonen is a boys-oriented genre, but I do feel like in My Hero Academia, they could do a lot more with the female characters. It does kind of bother me that Ochako doesn't get more screen time, and even Momo and stuff like that. I feel like you could dedicate whole episodes to them, and you could do a lot more with, their characters than what we overall get in the story.
I definitely feel like one thing they could have done with the whole female character thing is what might have been a good idea would have been to maybe strike one or two characters out of there, perhaps make the class a little smaller, and focus primarily on with female characters with specifically Momo, Ochako, Suyu, and Mina, because they're the most interesting of all the characters.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, yeah.
Plus, one thing I would have done as far as the love interest thing would have been swap Ochako for Mina, because frankly, such an extroverted, outgoing kind of character like her being interested in such a shy, introverted guy like Midoriya would have allowed for a lot more interesting character development than just the whole, I have a crush on this character, but I'm too shy and bashful to admit it, that we've seen in so many other anime. I'm just saying that's just my personal take on the whole relationship thing, because it would allow for some more interesting character interactions.
I think the relationship between Deku and Ochako makes sense. I think they're a good match together because they're both kind of nerdy introverts. But I like what you're saying, and I think that would actually work if they would have had a couple episodes where Mina becomes interested in Deku, and then she kind of starts pursuing him, and then that makes Ochako jealous, and then that kind of becomes the impetus for her to pursue him more, to be like, I just sat here, admiring him from afar, and I've lost my opportunity, and now Mina's gonna take it from me. I think that would be a pretty cool story arc. But then ultimately he would end up with Ochako anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a few fanfics where Deku and Mina is the main pairing, and the chemistry between the two of them is actually very interesting to read about, but that's just what I think about it. And I do feel like Momo is a character that could be interesting to develop, although I have to admit it is a little harder to come up with stuff to develop her with, because her main conflict was her self-confidence issues as a result of her getting her butt thoroughly thrashed during the sports festival arc, which for the most part she seems to get over by the time this arc, the Class 1A versus Class 1B arc happens. There definitely is potential there, though I have to admit Jiro definitely feels a little bit flat in terms of characterization, because after the school festival arc, she kind of just, there's nothing left for her to do. She got her time to shine and that's it. And then don't even get me started on Toru. Her whole gimmick is, I'm invisible and I'm naked.
Well, she's just like comic relief. What I will say about Jiro, which is something that just occurred to me as you were talking, was that she is kind of just like a job. Like she's got music powers and she's interested in music and she's kind of like One Note.
One Note? Was that a pun?
Jesus Christ. I didn't even realize that. But, cause like her personality is so associated with her quirk, it makes sense. But on the one hand, it's a little lazy cause it's almost like, like back in the day with wrestlers where they would just give wrestlers a job and that would be their gimmick, so she's the music girl. I like music and I have music powers.
Not to mention her hero name is literally her quirk name, Earphone Jack. It's like, wow, your character is really One Note and that note is flat.
What I wish they would do, which they're not going to do, but in my fantasy world, this is what they do. When they finish the My Hero Academia story arc, if they flash forward to the future where Deku is, he's an adult now and all the characters are adults. What I would love is if they made My Hero Academia a universe and they gave each character their own standalone manga. There would be an Uravity manga and there would be, a Deku manga and there would be a Creati manga and a Pinky manga. And like we could just have these solo superhero adventures with these characters and they would get a lot more characterization.
I mean, they are based on comic book heroes, and that is what happens with comic book heroes. They get their own individual storylines and comic series. Though based on the current comic industry, that probably wouldn't be a very good idea, especially when you consider the whole different continuities things. But hey, like I said, that's what we have fan fiction for.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would really like. Because I mean, I like shonen anime and shonen manga, but you could definitely feel the template. There's definitely a template to the shonen genre. And sometimes I feel like that's limiting to the characters, especially with the female characters, because the female characters are always my favorite. And sometimes I always feel like they get the short end of the stick.
It depends on the shonen type and how much effort the mangaka is willing to put into it. I mean, when you look at One Piece, now that series puts a lot of effort into it. I mean, even though the cast is gargantuan in size, every character feels like they get a sufficient amount of screen time, and all the female characters get their own times to shine. They're not too overpowered, but they're also very interesting.
What did you think about the second movie? Was it Rising?
Heroes Rising.
Yeah.
I definitely liked it better than the first movie because, for one thing, I like the fact the whole class is involved instead of like a small handful of them. And I definitely felt like the bad guys, at least most of them, were definitely more interesting. But the ironic part is that while the henchmen were interesting, since most of them became villains because of tragic circumstances or because of prejudice they felt, the main villain, Nine, he had a cool design and a cool gimmick, but he is boring as hell. And Johnny Young Bosch ain't saving that. Because I thought like maybe he was like one of those kinds of guys who wanted to create a society for all the downtrodden, the discriminated characters, kind of like Magneto from X-Men. But no, he's basically just Esdeath from Akame ga Kill, who operates by the strong need to rule over the weak. And that's all my backstory there is. And it's like, Really? That's the best you could come up with? After villains like Shigaraki, Stain, and Overhaul, and even Gentle Criminal, this is the best they could come up with?
I agree. I think he was kind of a shitty villain. He's so clearly just a stand-in for All for One. You know, he's just this kind of knockoff All for One. And from what I understand, that the ending of the second movie was planned to be the original ending for the manga, which I'm glad that they're not going to use that ending, because I thought that ending was terrible. Like, I thought that the ending of that movie completely undercut the whole, like, concept of the series. We're told from the beginning of this story that this is the story of how Deku becomes the greatest hero ever. And it's like, he becomes the greatest hero by giving his power to his friend and having his friend help him? Like, that's fucking lame. Deku's whole role is to learn how to become a great hero like All Might. And one of the ideas of the story is that All Might's not always going to be there for him. So he has to learn how to take care of these things by himself. So having him team up with his friend to overcome this, like, ultimate villain is, like, completely opposite of, like, the message of the story. So I'm glad that they did not use it for the ending of the manga, and I'm glad it was isolated to just this movie, but I thought that idea was pretty dumb.
To counter that point just a bit, I kind of like the idea of Deku sharing his power with Bakugo and fighting as a team, because one of the underlying themes or things that's been built up is that part of the problem with All Might is that while he was a great hero, the problem is that just having one single guy be the sole pillar of peace for the entire world is a bad idea. It is a terrible model, because eventually, like you said, he's not going to always be there, and once he goes down, people are going to freak the heck out. And society is going to have a serious problem, because countless villains, they either went into hiding or retired because All Might was too powerful for them to stop. But the second he goes away and they're left with this inexperienced kid who can't use his powers without crippling himself, well, now they have a chance to go out and run roughshod over everybody, because even Endeavor, the at the time number 2 hero, isn't nowhere near as powerful as All Might and can't fight nearly as well as he can. And the part of the reason that all of Class 1A is getting so much development is because I think a key lesson that Deku is going to learn is that he can't bear the weight of the whole world on his shoulders alone, no matter how powerful he becomes. But if there are multiple pillars, if all of Class 1A becomes a united front, then they can better bear the weight of all of that society is bearing against them and all the evil they'll face.
That's a good point. I agree with that. I like the idea of All Might being, you know, he's this universe's Superman, you know, and Superman is the symbol of hope. And it's not that there isn't another All Might who can't be the symbol of hope. We know Deku is that successor, but other people don't know it. And that, to me, is the interesting story, is fulfilling those shoes. And, like, the idea with Endeavor, like, you know, Endeavor is the number 2 hero, but he is not All Might, and he can never fulfill the role All Might had. And to me, that just, it speaks to how special Deku is as a character, that he is this person, the only person that could fill All Might's shoes. And, you know, and that's why he has to become this strong hero. I like the idea of Deku and Bakugo working together. I think that's an important part of their relationship, because, you know, they are rivals, and especially on Bakugo's side, he's very contentious with Deku. So, I mean, a natural evolution of their story is going to be these two characters learning to cooperate with each other. But I feel like in that second movie, that's just the wrong way to use it, of having Deku give Bakugo his power. I feel like that's just not, I don't know, that just doesn't feel like the right way to do that. I mean, they have to learn how to work as a team, where, like, okay, Bakugo, you're gonna go do this and I'm gonna go and do that, versus we're gonna team up together. Because even when you think about the first movie ends with Deku teaming up with All Might, and now the second movie ends with Deku teaming up with Bakugo, and it just makes him seem really fucking useless, where he constantly needs somebody else to help him. Like, that to me seems lame.
Well, again, remember, part of the thing with Deku is that he's not powerful enough to use all of One for All yet. I mean, we see that in the Overhaul arc when he does have 100% of One for All. He is powerful enough to, at the very least, defeat Overhaul. But again, you also have to factor in that even when he's using 100% of it, he's still like a 16-year-old kid compared to All Might, who was a guy in his 30s and 40s who had decades of experience in combat training. So, of course, he's still going to struggle even when he has all that power at his back. I think in a way it's sort of like a prelude. It's like you think to yourself, if he can cause this much damage and fight this well when he's only this young, imagine how strong he'll be in 10 years. Though one thing I would think would be pretty cool to see is if at some point Deku is put into a situation where he's like overwhelmed, and rather than just sharing One for All with one person, he shares it with like a bunch of members of Class 1A.
To me, that's even worse. That's an even worse idea. That's like in The Last Jedi, where everybody has the Force?
I'm just saying, you have to admit it would be pretty cool to see that, though.
Yeah, that to me it feels like you're undermining your character. Like, this is what makes him special. The fact that he's the successor to All Might. It even does kind of raise the question of, like, Deku is spending all this time learning how to use One for All. How the fuck does Bakugo know how to use it, just getting it like 2 seconds ago?
Well, you have to remember that Bakugo has been training to be a hero his entire life, and at the start of the series, he was already in crazy good shape and physically capable, whereas Deku was, well, let's not mince words, he was a complete wuss. He didn't have an ounce of muscle on his body. All Might even says that he needed to do all that training just to be able to house it in his body to begin with. Bakugo, meanwhile, he was already incredibly strong and tough from the get-go, plus with his quirk being all explosions, his body was probably more accustomed to that kind of explosive power, so it actually does make sense that he could handle it a bit better, but we do still see that when he uses it, he still pulverizes his arms just like Deku did.
I have no doubt that he could acclimate himself to the power quicker because of his existing quirk, but it just feels like, to me, it's very convenient that he could wield this power expertly, just having gotten it. It seems like you'd have to take a day or two to just kind of work out the kinks before you knew how to use it, to its full potential. Like, once again, we could rationalize it, but it just undermines everything Deku is doing. The fact that you could have his friend just get this thing, and then within 2 seconds, he could use it just as good as you can. It just completely undercuts your main character and makes him look really useless.
Well, remember, Bakugo is basically meant to be like the character who was just born lucky, whereas Deku basically got no breaks in life and had to work for everything. Bakugo was the kind of guy who's naturally just good at everything. We know he's one of the smartest guys in the class. Physically, he's incredibly capable, and he has an incredibly powerful quirk. That's part of his character, that he can learn and adopt new skills really quickly. That's pretty consistent for him, but part of his character arc is learning to be more humble about it and not feel that he has to be the best at everything in order for his life to have any kind of meaning.
Yeah, that is true. But that's why it's like, I feel like their relationship is more about, cooperation and learning how to help each other and accentuate what the other one could do better, and not necessarily, I'm just going to give you my power and we're both going to punch the shit out of this dude. It's like, I think you need to be a little bit more creative with the way they use their teamwork. But like I said, we're kind of going over this. It doesn't really matter because they're not going to end the series like this anyway. At least I hope they don't.
I very much doubt they will.
Yeah, I like where the series is going. What makes My Hero Academia really interesting to me is the fact that it is this Japanese shonen style American superhero story. And it's really interesting to see the way Kohei Horikoshi plays with the American superhero tropes. Because in a lot of ways, My Hero Academia is kind of like a meta superhero story, like something like The Boys, or even something like Invincible. And the thing I like about My Hero Academia is that it doesn't lose that kind of Silver Age comic book optimism, that it's not an overly dark story. And the fact that all of these kind of meta sort of superhero stories, like The Boys and Invincible, they take the Superman character and they make him this evil psycho. And I like the fact that My Hero Academia leans in to the whole Superman idea. The fact that All Might is this kind of smiling, dorky, symbol of peace. And it's an idea that everybody strives for and they want to be more like him. I like that the show is not embarrassed to do that.
It's definitely a good point to have, that being that even if staying positive in the face of adversity and tragedy is difficult, it is always better to be happy and positive and kind and compassionate and all that other stuff than it is to be cynical, cold, and, negative all the time.
Yeah, that's what I feel like is missing from a lot of American superhero stuff. At least a lot of stuff you're seeing now, like in pop culture. And I like the way My Hero Academia is almost like a reinvention of the X-Men, where UA is kind of like Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, and the quirks are all like mutant abilities. Even Bakugo is almost like, he's kind of like the Wolverine of the team.
Yeah, except with a worse temper.
But it's like that idea. He's got that berserker rage like Wolverine does. All Might is playing off the Superman idea. Bakugo is the anti-hero. He's like the gritty comic book anti-hero, like the Punisher or something.
Well, yeah, though honestly, I'm pretty sure Aizawa was supposed to be like the Batman of their universe.
Well, I actually always feel like, even though Batman doesn't have powers and Endeavor has flame powers, I feel like the All Might and Endeavor relationship is the Batman-Superman relationship. Because even the way Endeavor conducts himself, the way he's so like cold-hearted and he's all business. And there was that one episode, I think in episode 2 of season 5, when he comes home and he's wearing like the Bruce Wayne turtleneck. You know, that black turtleneck? He looked like Bruce Wayne. And especially the way they kind of bounce off of each other, the way Endeavor is so earnest and All Might is so like smiling and optimistic. I feel like you get that Batman-Superman relationship with those two characters.
I still think Aizawa's more of the Batman stand-in, but we could argue about that another time.
I want to read the manga because I really like the art style, and I'm sure they get into a lot more detail with the characters in the manga. But I've also like wanted to spend more time like thinking about like the social commentary and like political commentary in My Hero Academia, because it is interesting the way they use the heroes, because the heroes in a lot of ways are almost like a police force where they have to be regulated and they have to be licensed by the government. So there is a lot of bureaucracy within the world of the pro heroes that I feel like is probably commenting on aspects of Japanese society.
You also have to keep in mind that they're not just police officers, or I guess a better way to put it would be they're almost like mercenaries to an extent, but they're also celebrities. And because being a hero comes with such prestige and celebrity status, some heroes basically just become heroes purely for the fame. I mean, we see that with the Uwabame, the snake-haired hero that Momo interned with. She's a hero, but it's pretty obvious that she puts more time into the modeling and commercial stuff than she does her actual hero work. I guess you could say that's also a commentary on celebrities getting involved in stuff they probably shouldn't, maybe, or people adopting a certain profession for the wrong reasons.
I mean, it definitely is a commentary on sort of this celebrity-obsessed society and these people who are attracted to certain careers just because of what it can do for them. You know, like, I mean, even if you want to think about police officers, how many people become cops because they just want to do good, and how many people want to become cops because they just like the power they could have as being a cop?
Or because they watch too many action movies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you kind of get that sort of idea of like, which is rational, it makes sense, which is why, you know, this show to me has a lot of parallels to something like The Boys, where there's this whole system behind the heroes with like merchandising and PR. It makes the show very self-aware and very meta in that sense.
Yeah, I was kind of interested in the whole thing with Ochako, how she wanted to become a hero, less to help people and more to basically give her parents and family financial security. I always felt kind of disappointed that we never really got an exploration of her financial status. It's actually shown in like, you know, those little in-between note cards and everything they have in the mangas that give you little extra details about heroes and characters and stuff. They actually do a lot of that with Ochako and how broke she is. Like, before she moved into the dorms, she basically lived in a really small apartment. She would sleep most of the time because, in her own words, staying awake costs money, and during like heat waves and everything, she wouldn't bother turning on her air conditioning. She'd just sit in like a meditative lotus position and bear through the heat. And it's like, oh my God, this is sad, but also interesting.
This is why we need an Uravity comic. Ochako needs her own series where we could fully get into her character. She's one of the best characters in the show that is criminally underused.
I still think Mina would be a more interesting female protagonist, but that's just me.
You have them team up like Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. You know, you do that. You have the fucking Pinky and Uravity manga, which would be awesome. They're living together, they're roommates, and then they're solving crimes on the weekends.
And also getting into arguments and occasional fights about which one gets to be with Deku.
Yeah, that would be awesome. This shit writes itself.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Who is the hottest pro hero chick?
Mirako.
The bunny girl?
Yep.
I mean, I don't know if she counts as a pro hero, but I like Bubble Girl.
She is a pro hero. And
well, she's a sidekick, yeah.
Well, fun fact about her design, apparently that was actually, she was actually the winner in a character design contest in Japan.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Like the character, the costume, all that stuff, except for her skin. I'm pretty sure she was originally supposed to have like a different skin color, but they made her blue for some reason. I agree, she is very cute, but I personally prefer Mirako because she is tough, confident, nice amount of muscle, and she can kick serious, but I am all into that.
It's probably a tie for me with like Mirako and Bubble Girl, and I like the fact that she had a proper introduction in season 5, so we're going to be seeing a lot more of her going forward.
Yeah, well, actually, that's another thing with Vigilantes. You actually get like a whole arc where she's heavily involved.
Oh, that's cool. Well, that's even more of a reason to check it out. So, what else is going on in the world of anime news?
Well, if I had to pick one other topic that is most interesting, it would have to be a negative one, in the fact that people seem to not be able to stop talking about the Promised Neverland Season 2's ending and how much they hate it.
Yeah, well, that was terrible. I think that's got to be like the worst drop off in quality of like an anime or even a series in general.
I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with The Promised Neverland. I did see the ending, and I can certainly see how what amounts to a glorified clip show of single images with no animation that each image could easily fill up an entire arc of an anime would piss people off like no one's business.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I haven't read the manga. I've read up on it. I definitely want to start reading the manga now, especially after the awful fucking season 2. But like that whole like the dragon god thing, like I think it's called The Other, that's a whole story arc that they condensed to a single image, and that is fucking terrible. Even something like Game of Thrones, where everybody complains about the final season of Game of Thrones.
Which sucked.
There was a steady decline, and there was at least a reason for it, where they ran out of source material. But Promised Neverland has probably one of the best first seasons in anime. I would put the first season of Promised Neverland in like my top 10 animes of the 2010s. But that second season is just a complete fucking mess. Like, it's amazing how bad it goes and how quickly it gets that bad.
It is kind of funny because the second season, from what I've heard, it reeks of a rush job. They had so little confidence that the second season would work that they just decided to rush through the whole story and just put an end to it right there. And I'm like, Promised Neverland was like one of the most talked about anime when it came out. And I'm like, how could you not want to milk this thing for everything that it's worth? I mean, that's basically what they do. They've been doing that with Pokemon for 2 decades.
I've heard people say that the reason they rushed season 2 was because the Blu-rays of season 1 didn't sell well, which I don't think that's true, because first of all, these animes go into production way before the fucking Blu-rays go on sale. So they were already starting season 2. They were already writing the scripts and storyboarding it out before the Blu-rays were even on sale, I would imagine. And there definitely has to be more to the story than what we're seeing, because as we saw with Devil is a Part-Timer, where there's 8 years between season 1 and season 2, they could have done, because the first season of Promised Neverland adapts, I believe, the first 30 chapters. So they certainly could have adapted the next 30 chapters and then just ended it on a cliffhanger. You know, because there are people saying, oh, you know, they just wanted to wrap up the series to sell manga. But that doesn't make any sense, because if the series ended on a cliffhanger, that would inspire more people to read the manga, and you would at least have the option down the road, even if it took 8 years, to continue it. So, I mean, there is definitely a story here that we are not hearing. Like, there's some drama going on behind the scenes that we are not getting the full story of.
I personally don't feel like anime-only endings never work, because I felt like the first season of, like, the first Full Metal Alchemist anime actually did pretty well, all things considered. The manga wasn't even complete yet, and I still think the ending of Trigun, the anime, is better than the manga ending, but that's just me. But I definitely feel like it's weird that they would even feel the need to rush it, considering the manga's already over. It's not like they were under a time crunch. Though with the Blu-ray thing, I can maybe sort of kind of believe that, because I have noticed that physical media is becoming a lot less popular with people nowadays. Hell, I just went to a Best Buy a couple of weeks ago. Their DVD and Blu-ray section was basically one shelf, one rack. And I'm just like, oh wow, this does not bode well. Plus, it doesn't exactly help that depending on the distributor, they will sell you like 12 episodes for like $60. And depending on the length of the season, that is either a deal or a rob. In most cases, they're basically robbing you.
These are all things they would have been aware of. I mean, this didn't just happen. I mean, the physical sales has been taking a nosedive for a while. And so these are all things they would know going into making season 2, which is why I don't think it had anything to do with season 2. If I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat and just speculate what I think is going on, what it looks like to me is that this season to me reeks of like contractual obligation. They were obligated to make a second season, but somebody didn't want to do it. Somebody was like, we don't want to do this anymore. We're obligated to. So somebody was like, just slap some shit together so we could say we did it and we never have to worry about it again. Because if you would have just continued the story, or at the very least cover the Goldie Pond story arc, which to me, I think is the natural evolution within the anime, is the natural evolution of the story, that might have incentivized fans to want a third season that somebody, a decision maker who was high up, didn't want to happen.
I could definitely see the guys in charge being less interested in maybe making this anime compared to other series, because I feel like, well, for one thing, isekai seems to be the really hot commodity right now with as far as like anime goes, like with Konosuba, that time I got reincarnated as Slime, Overlord, ReZero. They might have felt that a story like, I guess you would classify Promised Neverland as like a horror thriller sort of. Maybe they felt like the market for that was too small for them to bother making more seasons of.
I don't know. I mean, it just, like I said, just like looking at what happened, it just reeks to me of somebody was not interested in continuing the series any further. And even the manga artist, Kayu Shitai, he's not credited on the last 2 episodes. He served as the script supervisor, I believe, for every episode of season 2 up until the last 2. Something is going on there. There is some drama going on behind the scenes that we're not getting the full picture of right now. This ending of Promised Neverland is just slapped together. I mean, it really is a fuck you to the audience, because it is just like, hey, here's some shit from the manga, shut the fuck up. You know, like, don't say we never did anything for you. Here's the dragon thing, here's the demon girl being coronated, shut up, we did it, go away. And, you know, speaking of what we were talking about in My Hero Academia, I mean, Promised Neverland is kind of one of those few shonen manga that has, you know, a female protagonist. And Emma is a great character, and it's a shame she didn't get more, you know, opportunities to shine. She was great in the first season, and then in the second season, she's got nothing to do. And it's not because the character's bad. It's not because the story is poorly written. It's just because whoever is making these decisions on how to produce the anime just doesn't give a shit. They're just slapping shit together to throw out there, and the story suffers for it, and it really does suck. I mean, it's a real tragedy considering how great that first season was.
I guess because I'm someone who never watched The Promised Neverland, I don't feel as strongly about this. I mean, I found out about the hook at the beginning of the anime, and I did think it was fascinating, but I guess the story just didn't do it enough for me because I never bothered watching it. But I can certainly understand why people who put so much investment into this story and characters and everything would feel so angry about it basically being cast aside like this. I mean, that's kind of how I felt when I watched the last season of Game of Thrones.
The ending of Game of Thrones sucked, but I was prepared for it because the quality of that series had been waning for a while. So, I mean, you knew it was gonna suck. The first season of Promised Neverland, it might be like a 10 out of 10. It's a really, really good first season. And then just the complete drop off of like the quality, and it's not even like incompetence. It's so deliberately patched together and done as an afterthought that it is really perplexing. In a lot of ways, the first, I mean, I'm always talking about The Matrix. I feel like I gotta stop doing it. But the first season of Promised Neverland, it does remind me of The Matrix, but it's actually almost more interesting than The Matrix because it's almost more overtly political than The Matrix is, because the whole idea of The Matrix is this system that is trying to keep you down and you need to kind of believe in yourself to overcome. And even like the agents in The Matrix, there are these programs that are now fighting against you. But in Promised Neverland, it's a much more obvious indictment of a system that is fucking people over. And the fact that Isabel, the mother, and the sister, Crone, they were all children that were raised in this system that are being forced to be evil and to do terrible things. And this idea with Emma and Norman and Ray trying to topple this system, it's all about cooperation and teamwork and organizing, because it's like just believing in yourself and doing what you want to do. Like, that's not a realistic way of approaching this problem. And because these characters don't have superpowers, it makes their situation a lot more relatable and a lot more realistic. And I like the fact that the strength of these characters comes from their ability to organize and to plan, versus The Matrix, I have superpowers, so I'm going to beat the shit out of everybody.
Well, that and the fact that they're literal children fighting against superpowered demons that would give even grown adults a serious challenge.
Yeah, the later episodes of the manga, from what I understand, it does kind of devolve into more action, but the first season is very much a thriller, and it's all characters outsmarting each other, and it makes complete sense. I mean, that payoff at the end, when they finally break free, I mean, we're spoiling the Promised Neverland. I'm assuming you've seen it if you're listening to this, but that payoff at the end when they finally break out of the farm, that's awesome. Like, it was, you know, one of the best prison breaks that you see in an anime, and it was all set up perfectly as like, I mean, it was almost like Hitchcockian, the way all these puzzle pieces went together, and I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, I'm probably not the best person to talk about this because, like I said, I'm not very well versed with Promised Neverland, but I still feel like I understand why people would be invested in this story and be so pissed off that it would be treated with such disrespect.
It really is just a missed opportunity. Hopefully down the line, maybe one day, somebody will adapt the story the way it's supposed to be.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see how things go.
I think that wraps up our discussion. I want to thank you for coming here and reading the news once again. And one thing we didn't really talk about in the last video is that you do voice acting, right?
Yeah, for the most part, I've only done a few comic dubs and a few small roles in some, I was the Joker in like a Lego video at one point, and I also was a character in an abridged series that pretty much died right after the episode I voiced, but I do try to do some voice acting. I even did a voice acting class with Chuck Huber.
Oh, that's really cool. You have a lot of examples of your voice acting on your channel, which I will put a link to in the description. I recommend everyone go check it out, and that's really cool that you're getting into voice acting.
It's been a pleasure working with you, Reverend Paul, and to all our viewers out there, I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe to this video, and if you want to hear more of our stimulating conversations, please tell us in the comments below. Thank you, and I hope you all have a nice time. This is the Fan Without a Face, signing out. Peace.